Tenemos un regalo el día de hoy. Está John Boyne con nosotros. Usted lo conoció por aquella novela famosísima, la del niño con el pijama de rayas, que fue un bestseller internacional. Ahora tiene este nuevo texto, Todas las piezas rotas, que por cierto es una suerte de secuela de aquella novela. John, I'm very happy to have you here at
It's good to be here. Thank you.
11. I met you 2 years ago on Zoom, and now I have you here. It's really a pleasure.
Yeah.
You came here to Mexico.
I did, yes. It's my third time here in Mexico, but it was my first time in Querétaro. So I spent a couple of days there. And
how did you find it? I mean,
I really liked it.
A lot of young people there?
Yeah. It was good audiences. I really liked the town, city, the little side streets, all the colours of it. It was, it was a lovely place.
It's one of my favorites, I can say.
Yeah.
It. Yeah, the weather now is terrible. But how is Dublin now? You live in Dublin.
I live in Dublin, and I love it there. You know, I've always lived really, for the most part, in Dublin. It's a good country. I encourage all your viewers to come and visit us.
You have good writers too.
We do. We have a lot of writers for a country of 5 million. We have a lot. We have 4 writers on the Booker long list this year.
And now you belong to this tradition. You are one of the famous Irish writers. How do you feel? How do you live with that?
It's okay. Well, you know, the thing is, from childhood, it's the only thing I ever really wanted. I never had a backup plan for my life. From the age of about 7 or 8, I was writing stories all the time. And I think in common with a lot of writers, I had a fetish for stationery. You know, I loved nice paper, nice pens. I still do. If you put me in a stationery shop, I'll buy everything. And I started writing, like, you know, very, very young. I was taking books that I read, and I would take those characters and write new stories for them. And then I would, like, bind them up and put my name on the side and put them on the shelves in my parents' house and things. So it was all I ever really wanted to do, and the only real job I ever had was in a bookshop. So, you know, it's always been books for me.
John, the Boy in the Stripped Pajamas was not your first novel.
No.
Usually writers are thinking that the first novel is going to be a crack, or the second one. This was your 5th.
Yeah.
And certainly the 5th made you famous. Why the 5th? Is the story? Is the maturity you got there?
Well, I mean, the first few books I wrote, they did okay, but they didn't sell huge amounts. But
they did bring food to your table.
Exactly, but also it got me published, and that's you know, I was happy to be starting my career. I wasn't actually expecting. I think a lot time now, writers expect their debut novel to be such a massive hit. But you know, I started. Well, it was 2000, so it's 23 years ago. But I think with Striped Pajamas, I think it was the friendship between the 2 boys at the centre of it. Mm-hmm. I think it was the surprise ending. I think that ending made people want to talk about it to their friends. I think it was the tone in which it was written. I think there's something about the fact that there is a naivety, I think, to that book, a simplicity to it that really works for it. And because we're seeing everything through the eyes of this 9-year-old boy, Bruno. And I think it was just unusual. You know, it was an unusual book. I wrote it in an unusual way, you know, because I wrote the first draft of that book in 2.5 days without sleep. You know, I had the idea one night. I started writing it the next morning. I wrote all the way through this Wednesday. I wrote through Wednesday night, through Thursday night. And on Friday, which was my birthday, at lunchtime, I finished the first draft. And it was just like the story had poured out of me.
There is a story that helps kids today to understand Holocaust.
I hope so.
So, I mean, many years ago, 10 years ago, you want a kid to understand this part of the human history. Anna Frank was a good book. But now it's your book that kids are reading at school.
It's been tremendous for me in that sense that the book that broke me through and, you know, was such a phenomenon, was on such a serious subject matter. And I love the fact that schools around the world use it with their children. I've gone into so many schools over the years to talk to kids, but I do always stress to the kids that my novel is subtitled A Fable. It's not exactly how it happened. Yeah, and all I ever wanted kids to do with it, in a way, was that if they got to the end of the book and they were moved by the story, that it might encourage them to go on and and read the Anne Franks and the Elie Wiesels and the Primo Levis of this world, and the people who have the real experiences. Because I do understand sometimes that there are criticisms of the novel in terms of it's been used as an educational tool, but I never meant it to be one as such. I just wrote it as a novel. So as long as kids, I think, take it and then find their minds opened a little bit to this subject, that makes me very happy and proud.
And now we have a sequel.
Yes.
I mean, a book, allow me to say that is more for adult people.
Yeah.
I mean, Gretel, that is the sister of Bruno, she's 91, 65 years past, and certainly there's another look to the same time, the same people, and there's another fable here.
Yeah.
It's a very different fable. I read that you said somewhere that you were thinking to write this book when you were 90 or 80 something.
Yeah. I mean,
finally you decide to write it now. Why and exactly what is the meaning of this fable that is different from the other one?
Well, I've been thinking about this book really since I finished the first one. You know, even when I finished that, I thought Gretel, who was 12 years old at the end of that book, and I've left her in a very traumatized state. And I always thought I would return to her. But I wanted to return to her in the opposite way of Striped Pyjamas, where Bruno is 9 and knows nothing about the world and nothing about what's going on there. I wanted to write her at the end of her life, where she knows everything because, you know, she's wise, she's lived a life. And I thought it would be, you know, interesting to see the story from those two sides. And it just seemed like the right time now. If I published it now, a woman like Gretel could still be alive. So it has a contemporary side to it, as well as going back through the decades of her life and seeing what led her from the camps to this point in her life.
I have reading this year Pierre Lemaitre. I don't know if you know this French writer. And he chose as well Second World War to explain the French history. But you have a story, and then the next story. Here there is a gap, an enormous gap, that makes something very different as a writing result. Why did you decide not to tell the life of Gretel when she was 20 or she was 17, but when she was 90?
I think it was to draw a distinct contrast between the two novels. You know, I didn't want to just to do a repeat, in a way, of Boyne the Striped Pyjamas. I thought, you know, that book is too important to me and important to many people that I wanted to honour its legacy. So I thought if I was to take Gretel as a child and follow immediately what happens, then it would be too much in comparison with that book. Okay. You know, it was interesting to me that...
It's not a sequel.
It's not a sequel. I think of it more as a companion novel. And it's, you know, while that first one is subtitled A Fable, I think this one is a much more realistic work, and it's a more complex work, which I suppose it should be, considering I'm 18 years older when I'm writing it. So, and I'm more experienced both in my life and in writing itself. So it's a very different book. Also, I thought I couldn't think of a book that was written with children in mind, that there was a sequel which was written with adults in mind years later. And I thought that would be an interesting kind of literary device.
The title is a very interesting one, All the Broken Pieces. I mean, humanity is a fresque of broken pieces.
Yes.
And we have the hope that at the end of our lives, we want to put all these pieces together. Well, I would like you to tell us if Gretel arrives to do that. I mean,
I think she does.
Let me just cut the program and we're going to be back in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Hacemos pausa y regresamos un momento, corte comercial. Estamos con John Boyne, estamos hablando de su última novela, Todas las piezas rotas, que es una suerte como segunda parte de Niño de Striped Pyjamas, que la verdad es que fue un éxito extraordinario. And we were talking about these different characters, Bruno in the first one, Gretel in the second one. And before going again through the novel, I would like you to tell me, who is John Boyne today and who wasn't 18 years ago?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. More confident as a writer, I would say. That earlier book it laid a foundation for a career that I always wanted. and it allowed me to write all the books since. I hope I am a better writer. I hope that so many of the books I've written for adults are first-person narrators, where I have tried to get into the psychology of a character. And I'm 52 years old now. I'm not 33, and I would like to think that I'm wiser, that I understand human nature better. I've spent my life writing these kind of books where I'm trying to understand humanity in some way. So yeah, I would say just more confident, more secure in myself. At the start of a career, even with a hit like Boy in the Striped Pajamas, there's always that fear that it's going to go away somehow, and after 23 years, you're pretty much fine, so.
I was asking you a moment ago about the title, All the Broken Pieces. The title could be as well, All the Pieces Together. Why did you choose All the Broken Pieces?
Well, the funny thing is, in English, it's actually called All the Broken Places, whereas in the Spanish language, it's called All the Broken Pieces. But it means much the same thing to me, because for the places, it's the places in the world that Gretel goes to that have been in some way or another destroyed by war and by the horrors of the Holocaust. But the broken pieces, it's the same. It's the internal ones in many ways. I think Gretel has spent a lifetime from 12 to 91, basically 80 years, trying to rebuild her life, trying to put all those pieces back together. And in a way, looking for a moment that will offer her an atonement for both the shame she feels about what her family have been involved in, but also her own shame at her complicity, at her silence after the war, at not giving information to the Allies that she could have given that would have been helpful to the families of victims or survivors. I think at 91, she has spent a lifetime trying to put all the broken pieces of her own life together. And because it's a novel, I suppose, an opportunity presents itself at the end of her life to do that.
We're talking about one of the words in the English language that I love the most, atonement. I remember when Ian McEwan published his novel Atonement, I was looking for an exact, precise translation to Spanish. And it's difficult to find it.
Really? Okay.
Because you have, it could be remorse, could be regret, guilt, but it's something in between.
Yeah. And do you know what that novel is called in Spanish?
Atonement. No, I don't remember now. I'm going to look for it. I read it in English.
Yes,
I need to look at it. But I would like you to tell us what atonement is for John Boyne.
I think it's coming to terms with the fact that you're not always going to do the right thing in life. A lot of the elderly narrators of my books have made one bad decision early in life that has affected them. It's there in The Absolutist, it's there in House of Special Purpose, it's there in History of Loneliness. Just people who, like, one small thing in life can put a life off course entirely. In Gretel's case, it's not what happened at the camps, because she was just a child. She was only 12, so she's not responsible for that. But it's the decision she makes after the war to put her own privacy, her own life ahead of the damage that has been done. And I think it's important to her, and it's important to most people in a way, that when she gets to the end of her life, she does not want to go out feeling that she has not atoned or just done the right thing in some way. And we all know there are moments in our lives that we look back at with regret, with shame. None of us are perfect. But do we get the opportunity to make up for that before we're taken?
Literature, a complex character is much more interesting than a simple one.
Yeah.
And you have very complex characters here.
It's because we're all complex. Like, people are complex. Everybody watching this show is complex, has their own life story, has their own problems. Nobody is a simple person. And I think it's the job of the writer to reflect that, to write people who are really ambiguous in some way. I mean, I like the idea of a reader getting to the end of a book and not knowing exactly how they feel about that character, and maybe having to talk to a friend about saying, well, I liked her sometimes, and sometimes I didn't. And because in real life, that's what we're like. We're all good, bad, and indifferent at times.
You were a master of exploring a kid's character. and most of your writing have to do with this exploration. And now you decided to explore this old adult character.
Yeah.
For a young writer, which is the difference between exploring a kid character and face to that, adult character?
I seem to do only that. I either write about children or I write about very elderly people. And the curious thing is I'm not a child and I'm not very elderly. I'm right in the middle. And I don't really write about people my age. I like
not yet.
I like writing, not yet. I like writing about kids, because, particularly in historical episodes, because if I choose a period where that is very familiar to people, if you put an innocent child into that, they can view it without all our adult knowledge. They come to it with such naivety, such innocence, that it gives me as the writer and you as the reader an opportunity to view that story in a very original and fresh way. When it comes to something like the Holocaust, it's been written about, quite rightly, so often, that you have to find a fresh way. And then I like writing about very old people because it's a total different tone. You can write somebody who is wise, who has seen so much in life, who is no longer frightened of life in the way that many of us growing up are, who has nothing to prove anymore. And I think like it's the two interesting age groups for me to focus on.
John, a character is a glass to look at certain reality. So you need, as a reader, to empathize with this character because it's your glass to enter this reality. And when you use a complex glass, as Gretel, it's quite difficult because you need the reader to empathize with a complex character that is not perfect, that is experiencing guilt and atonement, etc. How did you manage to make a Gretel a so empathetic character for us?
I think the way to do it is to make her interesting, you know, because I don't think a character has to be likable. Hannibal Lecter isn't likable, but he's interesting. You know, I think if you make the character interesting and challenging at times, if you write it where the reader is immediately grabbed and feels, I want to know more about this person, that's where the empathy comes in. And that's where the character can perhaps disappoint the reader when he or she does something morally repugnant, and the reader can cheer him or her on when they do the right thing. But I think it's always about making the character as authentic as possible. If the reader feels that that person is real and interesting and authentic, they will stay with them.
John Boyne, it was really a pleasure to have you here. I strongly recommend Todas las piezas rotas. Si a usted le gustó El niño, la pijama de rayas, no se puede perder este texto. Thank you, John, for being in Mexico, for visiting us, and for leaving this book. Vamos al segmento final del programa. Un poco de música para cerrar. Y de veras, lleves este libro. No puede dejar de leerlo. Es una reflexión, sí, de otra época, pero de lo más contemporánea. Y sobre todo cuando uno está viendo pues, que hay un momento en la vida en que tiene que rendir cuentas de todo lo que ha hecho.